At 74, Crystal Gayle has carried decades of stories in silence. Until now, for the first time, she's opening up about the bond, the battles, and the heartbreak that defined her relationship with her sister, Loretta Lynn. Their music may have touched millions, but what unfolded behind the scenes was far more personal and far more painful than anyone ever guessed. There were long silences between them, unspoken resentments, and one final phone call that changed everything. As Crystal finally breaks her silence, she's not just telling the story of Loretta Lynn, she's telling her own. And what she reveals in the next few minutes will forever change how we remember country music's most famous sisterhood. Crystal Gayle's rise to fame was never just her own story. It was one deeply entwined with her sister, Loretta Lynn's legendary path. Born Brenda Gayle Webb, Crystal was the youngest of 8 children in a poverty-stricken family in Butcher Hollow, Kentucky. By the time she was old enough to understand music, Loretta had already begun carving her name into country music history. For Crystal, this meant growing up in the shadow of a legend. Loretta was more than a sister. She was a symbol of escape, success, and survival. But for Crystal, that also meant navigating the weight of expectations and the whispers that she was riding her sister's coattails. Loretta had always encouraged her younger sister's talent, even helping her land her first recording contract. But early on, Crystal knew she had to carve out her own identity. Loretta was rough, raw country. Crystal, with her smooth voice and signature long hair, gravitated toward a softer, more pop-influenced sound. When Crystal decided to move away from the traditional country mold, some in the industry criticized her for abandoning her roots. Behind closed doors, even Loretta reportedly questioned the shift, leading to the first of many quiet tensions between them. They rarely spoke of it publicly, but insiders in Nashville said the distance between the sisters grew in the late 70s and early 80s, even as both of their careers soared. Crystal's hit, "Don't It Make My Brown Eyes Blue," turned her into a crossover star, while Loretta continued to dominate traditional country charts. Fans adored the idea of a sisterly duo, but privately, their relationship was becoming more strained. Loretta remained the bold, outspoken matriarch of the family, while Crystal often felt pressured to stay in her lane, gracious, quiet, and obedient. There were reports of missed holidays, unreturned phone calls, and family members caught in the middle. Crystal, who had always idolized Loretta, started to resent how often she was compared to her. She once said in a rare interview, "I love my sister, but sometimes loving someone doesn't mean you always understand each other." Now, at 74, Crystal is finally peeling back the layers of that love and the pain that came with it. Throughout the 1980s, Crystal Gayle built a life and identity that stood apart from Loretta Lynn. But that separation didn't come without sacrifices. As Crystal gained momentum with her polished, pop-country crossover hits and glamorous stage presence, many traditionalists accused her of straying too far from her roots. The criticism cut deep, not just from the public, but from within her own family. Whispers swirled around Nashville that Loretta disapproved of Crystal's image. The silky gowns, the jeweled eyeshadow, the sleek floor-length hair that became her signature. While Loretta remained the voice of coal country, Crystal was branded as the one who had gone Hollywood. But what few knew at the time was just how much Crystal longed for Loretta's approval, even when they were on opposing ends of the musical spectrum. In private, Crystal would often re-watch Loretta's television appearances and award show performances, searching for hints of pride in her sister's eyes. "I always wanted her to be proud of me," Crystal admitted years later. "But sometimes, it felt like I had to prove I wasn't betraying where we came from." Their relationship became a series of near misses, sharing a stage, but not a dressing room, attending family weddings, but leaving at different times. Mutual respect was always there, but so was a wall neither seemed ready to climb. Despite these silent tensions, both sisters kept up appearances in public. In interviews, they praised each other's successes. On camera, they smiled shoulder to shoulder. But backstage, friends noted the silence between them was often louder than the applause. During one particularly telling moment at a 1983 award show, when Crystal was nominated for a major honor, Loretta was noticeably absent. Some believed it was due to scheduling conflicts, but those close to the family suggested it was more complicated. Loretta felt like the family name was slipping into something too polished. One insider claimed Crystal was the future, but Loretta was afraid it meant losing the past. Still, Crystal pressed on, earning Grammy nominations and carving a lane few female artists had traveled at the time. And yet, the shadow of Loretta Lynn loomed large, not as a rival, but as a reminder. Every standing ovation came with a silent echo. Would Loretta have done it this way? And that echo would follow Crystal for decades, even as she smiled on stage, masking a sisterly silence that had never truly been broken. While the public saw two country queens standing tall on their own thrones behind closed doors, Crystal Gayle and Loretta Lynn's relationship was much more fragile than it seemed. It wasn't just about music anymore. It was about pride, protection, and a lifetime of unspoken things between sisters who loved each other deeply, but often struggled to show it in ways the other could receive. Crystal, forever the baby of the family, spent years feeling like she was being measured against a yardstick she never asked for. Loretta wasn't just her sister, she was a legend, a walking monument to what it meant to be real. To sing from the gut, to say things women weren't supposed to say. Following in those footsteps was like walking a tightrope made of barbed wire. As Crystal's success exploded with hits like Don't It Make My Brown Eyes Blue, she became a staple on mainstream television, from The Tonight Show to Solid Gold. Her image was pristine, refined, commercial, a carefully curated elegance that appealed to a broader audience. But that same polish drew side eyes from those who preferred the grit and heartache Loretta poured into every lyric. Crystal wasn't just breaking into pop. She was, to many, breaking away from the family's coal dust identity. It was hard not to notice the difference. Loretta sang about being a coal miner's daughter. Crystal looked like she came from a chandeliered mansion. And yet, the truth was far more nuanced. Crystal never forgot where she came from. She grew up in a cramped house in Paintsville, Kentucky. Just like Loretta, she walked the same dirt roads, cried the same childhood tears, but by the time she rose to fame, country music was changing. She wasn't trying to erase her past. She was trying to survive the industry's shifting demands. "I loved where I came from," Crystal once said, "but I had to make my own way. I couldn't be Loretta. Only Loretta could be Loretta." Despite the public's fascination with the supposed rivalry, the sisters never traded barbs in the press. But their emotional distance told its own story. There were missed calls, holidays spent apart, occasional reunions that felt more obligatory than heartfelt. And for Crystal, that stung more than anything. "I always wondered," she confided in an interview years later, "if she really saw me, or just the girl who wanted to be something else." But time, as it does, has a way of softening the edges, and in the twilight of Loretta's life, something changed. Crystal began visiting more, calling more. The barriers built on fame, fear, and fragile pride began to crack, and when Loretta fell ill, Crystal was there, quietly, faithfully. No cameras, no headlines. Just a sister sitting by her sister's bed, holding the hand of the woman who once made the whole world listen, and whispering words they had both waited too long to say. By the time Loretta Lynn's health began to decline in the final years of her life, Crystal Gayle was no longer the bright-eyed baby sister chasing her own spotlight. She was a seasoned performer, with silver strands threading through her famous dark hair, a mother and grandmother who had weathered storms of her own. And yet, in the quiet rooms of Loretta's Tennessee home, the roles reversed. Crystal became the caretaker, the comforter, the one sitting silently at the edge of the bed, hoping for just one more story, one more smile, one more shared memory before the end. Those final months weren't filled with fanfare or grand reconciliations. There were no Hollywood-style sit-downs with teary monologues, but something far more powerful happened: peace. The kind of peace that comes only when two people have seen enough of life to realize that pride, misunderstandings, and missed years can't outweigh the bond they were born into. Crystal, once unsure of where she stood in Loretta's heart, now held her hand with certainty. There was nothing left to prove. There was only presence. Family members close to them recall the way Crystal would softly hum old hymns by Loretta's bedside. Sometimes she'd sing the very songs they used to harmonize on as little girls back in Kentucky. Simple melodies that cut deeper than any chart-topping hit. When Loretta could no longer speak, Crystal still talked to her, reading from the Bible or telling stories about their childhood. It was as if she was trying to thread together every memory they'd left scattered across decades. And in those quiet moments, something even more profound happened. Forgiveness, not in dramatic declarations, but in the little gestures: brushing back a strand of hair, adjusting a blanket, holding a hand a little tighter. "We were sisters," Crystal would later say, "and no matter what had come between us, success, distance, time, that bond was never broken, just bruised, and I think we both knew that." When Loretta passed in 2022, the world mourned a country music icon, but Crystal mourned something different, something more private. She didn't just lose a sister, she lost the last living link to the world that shaped her, the last person who knew her before the fame, before the pressure, before she became Crystal Gayle. She lost the woman who'd taught her how to dream, how to fight, and how to sing with her whole heart. In the days following the funeral, Crystal didn't say much publicly. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke volumes. It was the silence of grief, yes, but also of gratitude. Gratitude for the good times. Gratitude for the lessons. And most of all, gratitude that in the end, despite everything, they had found their way back to each other, not as country stars, not as public figures, but as sisters. Two girls from Butcher Hollow who, for a brief and beautiful moment, remembered what it was like to just be family again. In the weeks after Loretta Lynn's passing, Crystal Gayle began reflecting publicly in ways she never had before. And for many longtime fans, what she began to reveal wasn't just about grief. It was about secrets, burdens, and truths she had held on to for decades. In one quiet interview on a regional talk show, Crystal said something that stopped viewers in their tracks. "There were things Loretta carried with her to the grave, but there were also things she made me promise I'd carry forward." What followed was a rare glimpse into the behind-the-scenes reality of being the younger sibling to a legend. Crystal revealed that while the world celebrated Loretta as the unshakable coal miner's daughter, the Loretta she knew could be fragile, insecure, and, more than anything, lonely. She gave so much of herself to everyone else, Crystal explained, but sometimes she didn't leave much for herself. Despite the public's perception that Loretta was always surrounded by family and fans, Crystal said there were long stretches when her sister felt isolated, even inside her own fame. And then Crystal dropped another quiet bombshell. There were songs Loretta never released, not because they weren't good, but because they were too personal. She wrote about things that would have shocked people, Crystal said, eyes glistening. Family betrayals, fears about death, regrets about how some things were handled between us, between others. She left them in notebooks. Some were lyrics, some were just letters. For years, Crystal had known about these journals and fragments, and in the final days, Loretta handed her a worn-out leather binder, something no one else had been allowed to touch. She told me, "Do what you think is right with it. I trust you." Crystal hasn't yet revealed whether she'll ever publish those words or turn them into music, but the fact that Loretta entrusted her with such a sacred piece of her inner life was something Crystal never took lightly. In the same breath, Crystal addressed another painful truth: how the music industry had, at times, pitted them against each other. There were labels, promoters, even fans who'd make comparisons, ask who was prettier, who had the better voice, who had more hits. It was poison. And for a long time, we both drank it. But Crystal admitted that in their final years, all of that faded. There was no more competition, just love. Crystal's revelations didn't feel like gossip or drama. They felt like closure, like the final chapter of a book that had taken decades to write. And for many, her willingness to speak out added a layer of humanity to both sisters that had been missing in all the glitter and stage lights. As Crystal continued to open up, the world started to see that her story wasn't just about living in Loretta's shadow. It was about honoring it, holding it up to the light, and then, finally, stepping out from under it, not to outshine her sister, but to keep her legacy burning. Crystal Gayle's journey after Loretta Lynn's death wasn't just emotional, it was deeply spiritual. In one intimate moment during a radio interview, Crystal recounted a dream that left her in tears. "I was standing in a field behind our childhood home," she said softly, "and Loretta was there. She wasn't old or tired. She was young again. She smiled and said, 'Tell them the truth, baby sister, all of it.'" That dream became a turning point for Crystal. She knew it was time to stop holding back, and so she began speaking more freely about the pain, the joy, the complicated love they shared. Crystal admitted there were times she felt invisible beside Loretta. "She was the sun, and I was just learning how to reflect the light," she said. But she also made it clear that Loretta never meant to overshadow her. "She once told me, 'I brag about you to everyone, but I forget to tell you to your face.' That stuck with me." Behind the scenes, Crystal had always been Loretta's confidant, her sounding board, her therapist, her sister. But in public, she often felt like she had to dim her own light to let Loretta shine. Now, with Loretta gone, Crystal was reclaiming that light. Not to compete, but to complete the story. One of the most poignant moments came when Crystal visited Loretta's grave for the first time after the funeral. She brought a bouquet of wildflowers and a copy of one of Loretta's earliest albums, the very one that inspired Crystal to pursue music in the first place. "I sat there in the grass and just talked to her," she shared. "I told her I forgave her for the times she hurt me, and I asked her to forgive me for the times I let her down. It was the first time I felt like I wasn't talking to a legend. I was just talking to my sister." Fans were deeply moved by Crystal's honesty. For years, the image of the Lynn sisters had been frozen in time. Glamorous, successful, inseparable. But Crystal was now showing a fuller portrait, one with cracks, shadows, and pain. And in doing so, she was giving permission for others to grieve more fully, to remember more truthfully. She also spoke of the physical toll that Loretta's career took on her. People think success is glamorous, but Loretta toured with pneumonia. She sang with broken ribs. She performed after funerals. She was strong, but she was also exhausted. Crystal revealed that Loretta had once confided in her, "I don't know who I am when I'm not on stage." And that's the heartbreak of fame. It can become your identity, your mask, your prison. In Loretta's final months, the two sisters talked often about legacy, not just charts and awards, but emotional legacy. She told me, "Let them know I loved deeply, that I tried, that I wasn't perfect, but I meant well." And Crystal, through her tears and courage, is doing just that. She's honoring her sister not as a saint, but as a human, flawed, brilliant, and unforgettable. As Crystal Gayle continued opening up about her late sister, Loretta Lynn, she turned her focus toward the world Loretta left behind. The fans, the family, and the ghosts of country music past. In one interview, Crystal shared something that made the room fall silent. "After the funeral, I walked back into Loretta's kitchen, and everything smelled like her. That same perfume, that same warm coffee scent. But it was empty, and I thought, this house used to be the center of the world. Now, it's just quiet." That moment captured what many had been feeling. An era had truly ended. But Crystal wasn't interested in just mourning it. She wanted to preserve it. Over the following months, she worked closely with the family to organize what she called the Loretta Project, a meticulous cataloging of handwritten lyrics, cassette demos, and family photos never seen by the public. We found voice recordings of her just talking to herself, Crystal said, choking up. She'd be trying out song ideas or just talking about her day. It was like finding pieces of her soul. Crystal became the emotional curator of Loretta's legacy. She started sharing bits and pieces of those recordings in small, intimate gatherings with longtime fans. One night, she recalled, I played a clip of Loretta humming a lullaby she never released. The whole room cried, because that was Loretta. She gave you a piece of herself in every note. But Crystal didn't stop there. She began hosting private dinners at her home in Nashville, small affairs with fans, industry insiders, and family, where they'd sit around a table, listen to Loretta's old songs, and tell stories. Some nights we laughed until we couldn't breathe. Other nights, nobody spoke, just tears and music, she said. It was therapy. And in those gatherings, something surprising happened. People didn't just talk about Loretta, they started sharing their own stories. A woman told me she left an abusive marriage because of Loretta's songs. A man said he became a nurse because of The Pill. These weren't just fans. These were people she changed. Crystal began to realize that Loretta's legacy wasn't just about what she did on stage. It was about what she made possible for others off stage. She gave people permission, Crystal said, permission to speak up, to walk away, to feel seen. But even as she honored her sister, Crystal also quietly began to heal something deeper, her own relationship with music. I used to sing because it was expected. Now I sing because it connects me to her. In a recent show, Crystal surprised the audience by ending her set with an a cappella version of You Ain't Woman Enough. The crowd rose in thunderous applause, not just for the performance, but for the courage it took to sing that song in a world without Loretta. Through all the grief, all the healing, all the unspoken truths, Crystal Gayle found something she hadn't felt in years, a voice fully her own. And in honoring her sister, she finally stepped out of her shadow, not as a star, but as a storyteller, a witness, and the keeper of a legacy too powerful to fade. In the final chapter of Crystal Gayle's journey to honor her sister Loretta Lynn, something unexpected began to happen. Fans, family, and even industry veterans started turning to her not just as Loretta's sister, but as the living thread that still tied them all to the golden era of country music. She never asked for that title, but in every interview, every stage she stepped on, and every story she told, it became clearer. Crystal had become the last voice of a generation that changed music forever. And yet, she carried that weight with grace. I never wanted to be a historian, she admitted in a recent sit-down, but I realized if I don't tell the stories, they'll disappear. In 2025, Crystal announced that she was working on a memoir, not just about her career, but about Loretta. The version of Loretta the world never saw. The version who cried in the kitchen when the charts weren't kind. The version who wrote lyrics on the backs of grocery lists. The version who sometimes asked, "Am I doing enough?" The book, set to be titled More Than Sisters, The Story We Lived, includes journals, private letters, and even unfinished lyrics from Loretta herself. But it also includes Crystal's own heartbreak. Moments of feeling overlooked, moments when the spotlight cast a shadow instead of light. There were nights I cried backstage because the crowd would chant for Loretta when I walked out, she writes in one chapter, and still, I'd sing because I loved her that much. Crystal also reveals the final promise she made to Loretta, whispered in her ear just hours before she passed. I said, "I'll carry your name like a lantern. I'll walk with it through the dark until someone else can see it and remember." And that's exactly what she's done. Today, at 74, Crystal Gayle lives a quieter life. She tends her rose garden in the mornings. She writes music most afternoons. Her home is filled with artifacts of two lives deeply entwined. Framed gold records, handwritten set lists, photographs of the two sisters sitting on tour buses and dressing room floors. But what stands out most isn't the fame or the memorabilia. It's the peace. "I used to chase something," Crystal once said. "Approval, success, identity. But now I sit with who I am, a sister, a survivor, a singer with stories still left to tell." As fans continue to mourn Loretta Lynn, They've found comfort in Crystal's strength, her voice, and her raw honesty. And in this chapter of her life, Crystal Gayle isn't just the soft-spoken beauty with the famously long hair. She's the keeper of a legend, the bridge between then and now, the woman who finally stepped into the spotlight not to be compared, but to be heard. And maybe, just maybe, that's what Loretta would have wanted all along.